Welcome to Talkin Trades. I am Rut Walker with Union Up, your host, and then always with me is Randy Beall, who is the business manager for the Atlanta, North Georgia Building Trades, also known as GeorgiaConstructionCareers.com. We are pleased to have David Moskowitz with the law office of David H. Moskowitz, who is a labor and employment attorney primarily focused on workers' comp, grievances, etc. So, David, we wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on with union members as it relates to what you do, and just wanted to welcome you to Talkin Trades.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So we wanted to talk about sort of the issues that what are the pending issues right now in the Georgia General Assembly that affect union members and their families as it relates to workers' comp and the things that you work on.
Well, let me answer this way. The laws that govern workers' comp in the state of Georgia, the State Board of Workers' Compensation has an advisory council that composed of all members of the communities, industry, insurance, labor, whoever. It's like 100-person makeup. Labor's representatives, particularly Richard Ray, who was President Emeritus of the AFL-CIO, and James Williams, who serves out of IBEW, serves as president of the North Georgia Labor Council. And they are your labor representatives. We have workers' comp trial lawyers that are on this as well. And all legislation since 1992 that goes to the General Assembly comes out of the advisory council for purposes of the legislature, at least. Right now, the two hot button issues that's being discussed, and there's been House Industry and Labor Committee meetings on these issues as well, outside of when the General Assembly meets. And there was one recently a couple of weeks ago. And the first one deals with indexing. And what indexing is that the maximum weekly workers' compensation rate that an injured worker would receive is based on 2/3 of their pay, their average weekly wage, going back for the 13 weeks prior to the injury. The maximum rate currently in the state of Georgia is $725 a week. So if you're a high wage earner, like many union members are, if you make $2,000 a week, you're only going to get $725. And it doesn't matter. So it really it affects them. And every time we've asked or needed a wage increase, it's supposed to be 2/3 of the state average weekly wage. Currently, the state average weekly wage, based on the Labor Commissioner's figures going through 2021, is somewhere around $1,200 a week. So that would result, 2/3 of that would be $800. I think it's $810. We are the only state in the country that is below 2/3 of the state average weekly wage. And, I mean, it's by a large margin.
We're the only state in the union.
Really? The only state. Everyone else either indexes, 36 states, I believe, index, and they index above 2/3 of the state average weekly wage.
Wow.
Some are even higher. And it's become a political tool. And I think the legislators are starting to get wind of this, and they're holding hearings on the indexing issue. And right now, our comp rate is at 59% of the state average weekly wage. It's $725 unless they raise it. So, and we're always behind the 8 ball. So that's an issue that's being looked at seriously. And to be honest with you, every time you increase the weekly workers' comp rate, less and less people are affected, because the higher you get, they're less high wage earners. So, I mean, the percentage and the numbers are like, the cost of the system is minuscule. It's like maybe a $3 or $4 million increase per year in the system. It's just that the industry, business, the chamber, these folks like using it as a political tool to trade bait. And it shouldn't be traded. And labor's taken the position years ago. I mean, even in the days of Herb Mabry, we're not going to negotiate for an increase in the average weekly wage of the comp rate. We're just not going to do it. If you want to give it to us, that's fine, but we're not going to give up anything to get it because it should happen automatically. I think
it would seem to me that law really affects union labor, especially building trades construction, the most, because as you get higher and higher on that wage scale, most of the time now you're looking white collar, right? And probably worker comp claims are less amongst white collar office type people, right? So I'm almost thinking too that part of the reason that law is the way it is it's aimed to hurt union construction people. I mean,
it's all building trade. I mean, there's not a building trade member I represent that comes anywhere close to 2/3 of their pay outside of the max.
Yeah, and what's amazing to me is, and you know, this might not be something that our membership wants to hear, but Rut, this is another, and David, this is another example of voting a certain way at the poll, Republican, and you think they're your friend. They've controlled our state house for years and years. And this is just a way that they hurt our membership, and our membership don't even know it until they get affected. And, you know, there's consequences to vote. And I know our membership don't like to talk about these things, and it's not popular, but you just got to be aware of everything that affects a member, right? And I think it's terrible to hear that we're last.
Yeah. Well,
Boy,
we're not even last. We're alone.
we're alone
by
you know,
ourselves.
yeah.
To give you an example, just humorously so people can figure this out, the person who made the presentation before the House Industry and Labor, you know, when you see these big checkerboards that are outside and they have these checkers, well, he took them and he painted them and he lined up 50 of them, stacked them on top of each other to show the legislators. And he went down he painted them different colors, and the black at the very bottom was Georgia. And I mean, the distance between the top and the bottom was enormous. I mean, even if they raise it to 2/3 of the average weekly wage, we're still 50. I mean, we're so 50, it's not even funny. And the arguments are, you know, well, we have other stuff in the system that makes it, you know, better than other states.
Such as?
Well,
what's their argument? I mean,
you know, they
Go to work hurt.
Yeah.
yeah. Don't get sick.
Well,
Don't get
well,
sick.
even humorously, this was really funny. You'll get a kick out of this. They said, which state's the best state to get hurt in because of the average weekly wage? So I'm sitting here listening to this, and God bless Dewey McClain, one of our representatives. I texted him during the meeting, and I said, can you just interject here and say, there is no state that is good to get hurt.
Right, yeah.
And he did go on the record, you know, like.
So, you know, I learned at sheet metal when I was repping over there, and I assume this law is still there. I know this may not be under your expertise, but there's a thing called interstate unemployment. You ever heard of that?
I've heard of it.
So,
I've never really dealt with
it's if you're a traveling person, and you know you work around, right? Take a Major League Baseball player, but they won't get laid off. But anyway, one of our workers, and they've worked in XYZ states, and then they're laid off. They can actually draw unemployment in any one of those states where they had enough hours. Like we would have members in 85 that was drawing in Connecticut, where the unemployment or the layoff, the unemployment benefit
rate
was a lot higher, right? I mean, they were $350 here or whatever the number is, $375 was $800 up there. Is that the same for workers' comp? Let's say that I've worked around. Well, let me say this. Let's say that I'm working for a company and I'm in wherever, New York. I get hurt. Do I make my claim in New York?
Well,
and would those laws apply?
It's governed by where your contract of hire is.
So if I was hired in Georgia, but they sent me to New York, then it's coming out of Georgia.
Now, there are some ways you have multiple contract of hire states. It'll say you're contracted in Georgia, but we know you're going to be working here, here, and here. Then you would opt into the state that pays more. For instance, I had a really interesting case when Northwestern merged with Delta, and the Northwestern members were unionized, and their contracts were absorbed by Delta. Well, Northwestern was out of Minnesota, and the Georgia workers' comp laws were better than Minnesota. So I had a whole group of flight attendants that tried to opt into Georgia because not because the benefit was higher, but you could get it for a longer period of time. And so that governed because of the contract was taken over by Delta. So it's a contract of hire. It really doesn't matter that you're working somewhere else or you're spending more time there unless the contract specifies it. But really in union business, it's pretty clear. There's not a dispute over it because the contracts are pretty definitive as to what the member's doing, where they're doing it, and what states they can or cannot apply. That's what's great because you do have a contract, which a lot of people don't have contracts. You're just hired in a state, and that's what takes place.
How much does that affect the issue of indexing? How much does it affect our ability to attract skilled workers here to the state?
Great question. Let me just tell you this. One of the people pushing this is a representative who is a personnel manager of a company here in Georgia, and it's a nationwide company. And he goes to meetings, and they all berate him about how lousy it is. And these are high skilled. I mean, it's not a union plan. It's more white collar, and therefore, they pay fairly well. And they don't have a lot of injuries because it's more sedentary, lighter, you're not out in the field doing construction. So he's one of the leading people trying to bring this up because he's been so humiliated outside of it with his other business people in other states because, I do think a lot of companies are like, your comp rate is this lousy. Why do we want to come here? We want our workers to be taken care of. We don't want to starve them out. We don't want to create a situation where they can't exist. We want them where they can function, get well, get back to work, and be productive.
Yeah, we want them to come. We want them to want to come here.
Right. I mean, and I think other employers really that look to Georgia, they want to know this. I'm starting to see more and more of that. So that's a great question, and I think you're going to start seeing the business types that want to do business here in Georgia look to that and make a big deal out of it.
And where are we on this issue in terms of where is it on Capitol Hill?
Well, it's a big problem because we're right in the middle of an election year.
Yeah.
And I do think that, in my opinion, you're going to see if the Democrats win some seats in the governor's office, this may change automatically, whereas it could just be, like you said, Randy, they've had 20 years to fix this, and it just has become a malaise. It's just dug in, and we're never catching up. And I think it is an embarrassing issue. I really think that to sit there and have your average to pay your workers almost just a little over 50% of their earnings. Come on, it's just not. It's not humane almost, to be honest with you.
That's just one problem. The other problem, again, being a rep at sheet metal, is like the most frustrating thing is when a person gets hurt, bona fide hurt, right? And it takes years, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, to get the company to acknowledge that they actually got hurt on the job.
Yeah.
It's almost like, and not all companies are this way, and we're not going to lump them all in, but there are some out there, and David, you know this, they stall it out. It's a stall tactic because they know they have more money and time than you do. So all they got to do, and I've seen members lose their house, which ultimately means their marriage is gone too. So I've seen houses gone, divorce happen, their car is gone, and they're left with nothing. And then finally, they get their injury fixed. I'm talking about just to get their injury fixed.
Yeah.
Not to mention and then let's reward them by making them sign a paper that they can't ever work for that employer again. It's the most craziest back-assward system I've ever seen in my life. If I'm there to do a job for you and I hurt myself or I get hurt on the job, people make mistakes, things happen. We want to minimize every injury we can. But if that happens, I would want to be the employer that takes care of that person to the 10th degree, right? I want to be a good employer. But man, that just don't
If you
happen.
want to attract the best employees. You certainly
you
do.
know,
And you
I
starve them out.
I have a case right now, operating engineer case, that we just got finished trying. And literally from the date of injury, which was September of 2021, no, excuse me, September 2020,
So 2 years ago.
2 years ago, by the fact that we've had to litigate it, it is yet to be resolved. I'm in the appellate courts. I may get it, and we won the case, thank God, but it could get reversed. And this poor guy, I don't know how he makes it. He has 3 children. He moved here from New York as a crane operator, and he has 3 children. One is a special needs child, and he has tried to do everything. He cannot go back to being a crane operator because of his injury, and he was making great money. He came down from New York. He worked in Manhattan, so he was like the kingpin of crane operators. Yeah. And he legitimately got hurt, and they've been playing games with him with everything possible. I mean, we clobbered him in court, but, you know, here we're coming up on 2 years.
Yeah.
And he still hasn't been compensated.
What that wants me to ask you is, it leads me to ask you this. What is as much as possible, what is the fail-safe method for a person who gets hurt on the job? What steps should they follow? And to ensure, again, it may still happen, but to help ensure you can win a case in a more timely fashion. Tell me the steps, and then tell me the pitfalls where people don't do the right thing.
Well, here's the first thing that, I mean, there's like 4 or 5 steps, and it isn't fail-proof. I mean, I have to tell you,
of course,
you can do everything possible, and it's just, this is an antiquated, obsolete system. It doesn't work. It doesn't protect. But the best I can tell you, if I get a case come in, the first thing that I tell anybody is, you need to report this immediately to somebody in a supervisory position. Make them take a statement if necessary. Record them. Anything like that.
So document with the supervisor. Okay.
Make sure. And when you report the injury, make sure you report all body parts and be as specific as you can, because if your shoulder hurts, it could be your neck, coming from your neck into your shoulder. It could be your arm coming down from your shoulder. So you need to be specific as to wherever there's an ache or a pain or whatever it may be.
Don't dismiss any pain.
Right. If you didn't have it before and you got it now, you need to make sure it gets in there.
So the guy who's dusting himself off, you know, has some sort of accident, falls off a ladder or something, and picks up and goes, you know, kind of, let's move on. He needs to be aware that could cost him lots of money and time.
Could cost him his livelihood.
Well, look, let me just say this. You know, union member, most folks, especially in construction and in the building trades, if you cannot perform your full regular duty activities, I mean, just in the slightest, you're going to be disabled for all practical purposes under workers' comp if you've been injured on the job, because they're not going to put you out there unless you're completely cleared. I mean, I've got like a group of UPS workers right now for the Teamsters, and these poor guys, you know, if they have lifting restrictions that they cannot lift over 50 pounds, they cannot go back to work. And they beg these, I mean, they make great money, and they beg these doctors, please just lie if you have to and release me, because I can't live off $7.25 a week.
Yeah.
And so that's the other part of this. So you really need to make sure that whatever the ache or pain is that you feel comes from the injury, you've got to document it. And then, the other thing that's real important here, this is probably the most important thing. In workers' comp, the employers control the medical. They tell you where to go, when to go, and how to go.
Yeah.
And with the way the medical community is working these days, it's like a wrecker service, the doctors you're provided. The ones that, in my opinion, they do not provide you proper and adequate medical, because the good ones don't get involved in the system. And the ones that just want to have you come in and check you in and check you out, like Docs in a Box, industrial clinics, places like that, that's where they're going to send you. And you just can't get...
Well, they're contracted by the contractor.
You're exactly right.
So who's paying the bill?
They're paying it. I mean,
exactly.
So they can... the theory is, I'm paying the bill. It's at 100%. It's the best insurance for a body part that you can get. Not the best, but the most inclusive. But that theory is because we're paying it 100%, we can tell you where to go, when to go, and how to go. And they provide you with the worst doctors. I'm sorry, you can say whatever you want, but if they were decent doctors, they're not going to play this game because they're told how to treat people.
Yeah.
And if you don't play their game, they're going to take you off the list.
Are they trying to? I mean, we had a discussion earlier about the advancements in with an insurance carrier, and they were talking about telemedicine. Is that another way that you can, like, what's your thought on that piece of it?
Well, let me tell you this much. This is really where the rubber's meeting the road these days. I'm not a big advocate of telemedicine.
Yeah.
And let me tell you why. I'm from the old school, and, where doctors were salt of the earth. I mean, I can remember in my lifetime, not that I'm the oldest person, but I remember the doctor coming, making house calls to visit me when I was sick and growing up in LaGrange. And he'd come out on Thursday or whatever, that was his day, and he would come see, or he'd do it in the morning before he go to work. Those types of doctors are gone. They don't want to see patients. They don't want to talk to patients. They want to have as little involvement as possible. But if you're suffering from a certain broken bone and even a psychiatric overlay issue, if you can't see that patient in person, you can't do it on a Zoom. Yeah. I mean, I've got a big fight going on right now with a CWA employee who got caught in a crossfire of a gunfight here in downtown Atlanta. And he got skinned by a bullet, and he's just completely freaked out. And this poor guy lives in Griffin, and they sent him to a psychiatrist in Atlanta, and he's been restricted from driving to Atlanta because of the PTSD. Mm. Well, the doctor they picked for him does not see patients live. Mm. And to me, if you're suffering from PTSD and you can't observe the person like you and I are looking at each other firsthand, how can you make a proper diagnosis? And they're threatening this guy that if he doesn't go to this doctor, they're going to cut his benefits off. If he doesn't, and he doesn't want to do it over Zoom.
Right.
And the doctor only sees patients on Zoom. So I have filed a request out of the Medical Ethics Board asking if this is appropriate, as well as the Georgia Psychiatric Association. And lo and behold, I have gotten no response. Mm. And my guy refuses to do it. And I don't blame him. Who wants to open their guts out about a job injury like that or whatever over a Zoom call? I mean, and on top of that, here's something else you need to think about, and we here in labor can understand this better than anybody. Number one, Georgia has terrible broadband. I mean, who's to say that he even gets a good connection? Yeah. And the other thing is, what if he didn't have a laptop?
Who's listening?
I mean, and who's listening? And then, you could do it on a phone. Think about Zoom in on a phone. Yeah. How impersonal that is. So, I think telemedicine is just a lazy way out of doing your job, is my opinion. I mean, look, doctors should examine. They should. I mean, one of the things I hear more from my clients than anything, you go to the doctor and you say, well, how'd it go? What did the doctor say? What did the doctor do? This is just from old school thinking. He didn't touch me. When a client says that to you, that just means he said, walk across the room. Let me see how you walk. See how, if I see anything. But when they say that, that means that they weren't examined.
No. Yeah.
How can you, so anyway.
I have two final questions for you. One is, if I have you're an advocate, whether you know it or not, for members having disability policies aside from, I mean, you're singing the praises of people that were in here before you, but those are a lot less. It's sad when they're easier to prove and get your money from them than it is a system set up through the law. It's easier to get money from an Amalgamated or a Cornerstone or WalterHenry.com, whatever, than it is. Isn't that sad?
Than the people that are ostensibly there to help you.
And do you know, just when you see this on a day-to-day basis, you know how much money the workers' comp system is dumping on these other folks? They're cost shifting it. I mean, what they do to Medicare is atrocious. Georgia's the only state in the country that has a 400-week cap on workers' comp medical. So what they're trying to do now is if you get Social Security and Medicare because of your work injury, they'll cut you off after 400 weeks in some cases and say Medicare can handle it. And Medicare, they need to get wind of this because I'm just going to tell you, it's going to cost that system. Georgia's the only state that has this, and they shouldn't be putting up with it. And that's a major cost shift. That's to me, it's criminal. It really is. I mean, they're going to screw up Medicare for a lot of people here in Georgia simply because of the fact they want to dump injured workers' injuries onto Medicare.
You know, I know you can tell, Rut, and I hope the viewers will notice too that David, longtime friend of the building trades and all unions, but when he speaks, he has passion for what he does, and he sees the atrocities that's handed to union members and workers alike, not just union members. David, thank you for what you do on behalf of membership. But for workers in Georgia, not only union workers, but all workers in the advocacy you're doing at the state capitol to try to change laws. It's sad that we need to have attorneys for this, but I'm going to tell you, you better get an attorney. And there's no one better than David Moskowitz. He's been around a long time, not saying you're old, but he's been around a long time supporting these kind of things. And so, David, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, I was telling Randy before we came on, I do not have a website, but I have my cell phone number, and you are free to call me on it at any time. That is 404-502-2771. If you can't get me there, you can text me. Just tell me who you are. And I am conveniently located right in the House of Labor at the IBEW Building, 510 Pulliam. Right here in Atlanta.
IBEW Building. He's on the 5th floor. What's your suite number?
542. Just come and knock. I'm usually there regular hours, and we'll be glad to help you with anything. You don't always have to jump in and raise the roof, but if we have to, we will. And you know, I really appreciate what you guys are doing. Information, education, you can't get enough of it. I was a former school teacher, high school teacher for history. And we really need it in the workers' comp arena more than anything because an intelligent, educated worker is deadly.
If you're injured, if you're a union member, call David. It's 404-502-2771, and I'll put that in the notes. David, thank you so much for joining us on Talkin Trades. We really appreciate it.
Right. One last thing. He said he was a history teacher. Let's stop repeating history as it comes to as it relates to screwing over workers.
Yeah,
we need to stop that.
That's a good
Thanks,
point.
David.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.